Dart and Flutter support sound null safety. What does this mean for you as a developer? Well, several things actually, that translate into principles or rules. The first, and probably most important, is that variables are non-nullable by default. Let's see an example. Open your browser and get to dartpad.dev. If you're not familiar with it, this is a tool that allows you to write Dart code without creating a new project on your machine. First, delete the code in the main method. Next, declare a string called name. Then, print the name variable on the screen. The thing is, you won't be able to run this code, as it won't even compile. Note the error that appears at the bottom of the screen. It tells us that the non-nullable variable name must be assigned before it can be used. Interesting. Now, for the sake of comparing code that follows null safety and code that doesn't, disable null safety pressing the switch at the bottom of the page. Now run the code, pressing the Run button. As you can see, the code now works and prints null in the console. This is because when you do not follow null safety, your variables can be of the type you choose, in this case string, or null, and both values are valid. With null safety, your variables cannot be null by default. So, enable null safety again. There are several ways you can fix this code while enforcing null safety. The most obvious is probably assigning a value to the name string, so, for example, this could be Flutter. Run the code. As you might have guessed, the Flutter string appears in the console. In several cases, you would just assign an empty string at the beginning of your methods. But there are cases where you might need your values to be null. Remember the rule: all variables are non-nullable by default. The key here is by default. This means you can choose to overwrite the default, right? And this is actually true. You can use the question mark symbol after the type to specify that your variable can be null. So add a question mark after string and remove its value. Now name has become nullable. Run the code again. As expected, null appears in the console. So the question mark overrides the default behavior and allows nullable types, but in order to use null, you must be explicit about it. Now, you may think that this overcomplicates the way you think and write your apps, especially if you've written thousands of lines of code before and they work perfectly well. And this brings us to the real question here. Why is null safety an advantage to you as a developer? Well, if you have created software for any length of time, you've certainly experienced null errors. These bugs are generally tricky as they happen at runtime and not necessarily each time you run your code. So, the first advantage is that if you use null safety wisely, you can completely remove this kind of bugs from your code at compile time. In other words, you increase your productivity and the quality of your code. Another advantage is that, as in many cases your variables will never be null, the compiler won't need to check for nulls. And so it will optimize your executable that will get smaller, faster, and use less memory. In the remaining of this course, you'll see several techniques to deal with null safety in Dart and Flutter, and an easy way to automatically migrate your old code to null safety. In the next episode, let's have a look at type promotion and functions.